So, welcome everybody to our second talk. Just two small reminders. First, you can vote the talks you have seen from the guidebook application or from the guidebook website. So please vote the talks you have seen. Second, remember that this evening there will be the Google Code Jam programming contest. You can register from the EuroPython website, and you must register if you want to join. After this, let's welcome David, who will talk to us about open source as a business. Thank you, David.
Can everybody hear me good? Sounds like it. So my name is David Cramer. This is my third year at EuroPython, actually. I usually speak about scale and performance and testing and stuff. Actually speaking about that tomorrow, but this talk's going to be a little different, and this is like the first time I've really talked about this. So this talk is actually a lot about Sentry. And Sentry is an open source project that I started while I was at Discuss, and it's now a profitable business. And I'm kind of going to talk about both sides. I'm going to talk about why it's important that companies, or Discuss specifically, valued open source, and kind of some of the lessons that I've had throughout starting this business venture. So it's two things. It's very much a business, and it's very much an open source platform. We have a lot of users. I wish I knew how many. It's really hard to say. How many of you in here use Sentry? Pretty good. How many of you host it yourselves? Kind of what I expect. So Sentry all kind of started with like a how do I do something question. I used to hang out in this Django IRC channel, and somebody's like, how do I aggregate errors in the database? I'm like, well, that's easy. You just do something like this. And then I threw this into this project in 2008 called Django DB-log. It was pretty terrible. Not gonna lie, but Discuss found value in it, in the sense that when I joined Discuss, they were using it, and it made no sense to me. So shortly after I joined Discuss, I think within 2 months, we kind of created Django Sentry, which was just a drop-in Django application. It wasn't the worst looking thing in the world, but looking back on it, it looks kind of awful today. We kind of iterated on that. In 2011, we launched Sentry, which was like a more standalone platform. Kind of looked a little bit like this, very similar to what it is today. And then, finally, continued to evolve this platform, and it's starting to provide more and more functionality. It's very, very clean now. We've put a lot of time into design, even before it was a company. And I think the coolest thing about this is that it's maintained by the community, but not in a traditional sense. So we support many platforms. Just a few. These are the ones that are the biggest and that I could find shiny logos for, but literally every platform is supported. Officially, we only support a few. And by officially, I mean Git Sentry, the organization. We support the ones that we've basically written ourselves. But in reality, we actually only write Python code, and we kind of expect everyone who's better at these languages to help support the clients. So I said it's maintained by the community, but that's only true for a few things. So if you look at the Sentry contribution graph, 2 of these people work at Discuss or worked at Discuss, and they barely have any commits on here. So it's 99% just me writing the code. So even though it's open source and it's very popular, and it has had quite a few contributions, it's very much like I'm just building the project myself. But it's not so much a big issue. This is valuable because I can drive the direction of the product, and it's something that I drove from the beginning, and I don't really need people's help with that. I'm using it day to day, companies are using it day to day, and it's not a problem in maintaining that, I guess, is the way I'd put it. Fortunately, for all the stuff that we don't care about, and the languages we don't understand, there's many, many extensions. You have clients implemented in just about every language. You have various notification extensions, issue trackers, etc. So the main takeaway that out of this is that open source isn't necessarily about people helping you maintain your code, but this was about the community is building the things that we don't really need or care about. We just kind of made it possible for them to build that. And then the takeaway for Discuss, and I think this is actually pretty important, the biggest sell that we were ever able to make for Discuss to do open source was after we had already done it, and we saw like people coming in, like interviewing and stuff, and they're like, oh yeah, I heard about Sentry, or I saw some open source project you had. So it really helped recruiting efforts, which we were terrible at, so it was actually a big deal for us. And it helped a lot of visibility. Like it's helped me get a lot of visibility in the tech world, but like through me it also led to like people hearing about Discuss at conferences and things like that. So if you need any pitch at all, that is going to be your greatest aspect to get open source in a company. So the majority of this talk, I actually want to talk about like how we made this side project a business and how we like took this open source thing that we built at Discuss on company time and we built a not Discuss company outside of it. So I think it's important to talk about a little bit of the background, like why start a company, like why did we even want to do this? It wasn't purely motivated on making money or having a business or a startup or anything like that. It actually was one day, a guy from Heroku came up and he's like, why don't you create an add-on out of it? I'm like, okay, that can't be that hard. You know, maybe I can get some beer money out of that or something, or buy people drinks and stuff. It was actually a lot harder than that. That was the day I learned that to create a Heroku add-on, you don't just package something up. You actually have to have like a hosted service, and there's a bunch of effort that goes into that, and you know. So as soon as I learned that, I'm like, maybe I don't want to do this. Anyways, after several months of testing, it was like Christmas break, and you know, Sentry was already pretty good at that point. We just had to implement a few features, and that's when we decided to actually launch GetSentry.com. And then, you know, Heroku has this process where you go from, like, there's like an add-on beta program, basically. Like, you can get a few users, like, selectively invite them and whatnot, and then you go through like a private beta, and then you basically request that your add-on gets flagged from private to public, which at the time took a long time. I don't remember why, but fortunately during that time we decided that we would collect money from other people, because people were like, well, can we pay you without using Heroku? And I'm like, it can't be that hard. And in the US we have this nice platform called Stripe, which I don't think is available outside yet, but took a couple days, literally a couple days to implement Stripe. And then we had our first paying customer, which was about a year and a half ago now, who's actually an employee at Discuss now, which is pretty cool, and also wrote the JavaScript and Node.js clients. So that was actually really beneficial, and this is probably one of Discuss's better hires, and he purely came in because he was doing a bunch of Sentry stuff, which unfortunately for him was like a month before I left Discuss. Anyways, so like I talked a lot about, like, we started this as open source, and we're like, yeah, maybe we can make some money on the side, but it was like, when we thought about this, like, the goal was never to make like a really profitable business. Like, otherwise we'd be charging ridiculous amounts of money, maybe doing well, maybe not, who knows. So we kind of actually just came up with these this week. We're like, why did we build this? And we came up with 4 principles. So the first one is, why do we charge? Well, nothing is free. So why should we give it away for free? If you wanna have like free Sentry, host it yourselves. Like, that's not my thing at all. Like, I don't really care. So it's important that we created a sustainable platform, which means that it needs to pay for itself. This isn't super early, like in the first few months. Fortunately, we were able to make that work right away, but like, we never cater to the free user. Like, we don't even, like, we have a free account, and I don't really care, it costs us nothing, but we call it a trial. We call it a trial not because it's limited, but because, like, it's not a priority for us. And then on top of that, don't overcharge. Now this is like the tricky thing, because to me this means something very different than normal businesses, where, like, to me don't overcharge is like, what's the bare minimum I can charge to a customer? Which I've recently, or not so much recently, but over the last year I've learned is a lot more than I originally thought. So for example, we don't charge a per seat or per project pricing because it has no value, or it has no actual cost on our infrastructure. Our only pricing is based on how much data do you send to the system. The third one, and I think this is actually one of the most important, was open source first. Like, we don't fork Sentry. We run on Sentry's master, like the latest commit all times, in production. And this is actually important and also very, very challenging. So the only code that exists inside of GetSentry is a couple of like integrations that handle like account management, subscription management. There's a little bit of custom code to do like quotas and stuff, but that's all like built on like an extensible architecture that we built inside of Sentry. I can't really say that this was the right decision. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but maintaining code inside of Sentry just to make GetSentry work has been very, very challenging. And And then number 4, and this is kind of my favorite, is that our ideas are best. And because this is a side project, it's profitable and we don't care, like, I have absolutely no reason to implement any feature you want, unless I think it's a good idea. And this has actually worked out pretty well, because eventually people think their ideas are less useful after they've used the system for a while. And it also leads us to less like reactionary things. Like, we'll fix the bugs and like we'll try to come up with like a realistic solution for a lot of the product, but we don't build features every day. Like, I have half a dozen branches locally that have been sitting there like 6 months with, I don't know, 90% complete features, and it's just like that extra 10% is like, what's the best way to do this? And it's nice to not have to like push that really fast. And that was the advantage we had for a long time doing this as an open source project and inside of Discuss, in that like we never ever needed this to make money or to make a living. Like, we always had this other source of income, or it was just like we were building it for Discuss, so it was just kind of this project internally. But yeah, so it came down to like a lot of it now. It's like, sure, we'll listen to feedback and we'll collect that, but like tuning out the noise, I think, is the best lesson I've had from product development. And this is kind of something I've talked about like on my blog, on Hacker News, on various things in the past, is like we've always been about keeping it lean. And I am super, super cheap when it comes to everything. I don't like spending money unless I'm going to like get value out of it. And if I can spend the money, can I spend less of that money to get as much value? So literally from day one, the goal was to not spend any money. And actually, like, I'm happy to say like 100% of the time Sentry's been profitable, but that was through a few various reasons, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So the main lesson here is if you're starting a side project or whatever and you're paying money to run it, which I've done many times in the past, eventually you're going to lose enough money, likely, it's probably not going to work out, you're going to lose money and you're not going to want to do the side project anymore. So it was a big deal for us that if we were going to do this thing and it was going to be a side project and it was going to like be charging and stuff, like it had to cover its costs as soon as possible. Heroku thankfully helped us out for the first 3 months. We didn't have to pay them any money, which may be bad for them because shortly after that we switched off of Heroku. And we switched to a dedicated hosting company called SoftLayer, which is a very large company in America. And they actually have an incubator program that gave us like $1,000 in credit per month, which seems like a lot, but it is not a lot at all when you have their servers. But most importantly, we started charging from day one. Literally the day, actually maybe it was even a couple days before the site officially launched, like we had paying customers. And we only had a few and they were not paying anything at all, but it helped. It like validated right away that we had a business model that was gonna work, and we just had to figure out how to like ramp it up. So I mentioned like, and obviously a lot of people host their own Sentry versus pay us money, which we don't really care about. So it comes down to like what makes sense. Like if you look at GitHub, for example, you can pay them money to use their subscription platform, or you can pay them money to get a virtual machine to host GitHub on. We can do that. We choose not to. So like we literally made the decision that we don't really care if you want to host it yourselves. Like you have a very different use case than what we're trying to offer, and it's a very different audience. Like it's going to be larger websites. They're going to have a different kind of cost associated with them. For example, they could be sending a lot of data, or it could be one of those things where it's like sales relationships, or you need weird proper invoicing, or any number of things that don't apply to small to medium-sized businesses. So what we did instead is we focused on minimizing the costs. That is like getting as high margins as possible because we had so many customers and we had the capacity to make that possible by just targeting these smaller companies. And that's also where like a lot of our pricing reflects. Like we're actually probably going to change some things. Like as we've learned over time, the smaller customers have been cheaper, except on customer support. And the big thing here was we had this pricing model that sort of catered to small customers, but also attracted some semi-large customers. And those semi-large customers, being in the business of error logging, when they have an error, is not very fun for the system. Which if you're a small website, you're probably not sending that much data overall. But if you're a very large website with hundreds of servers and, I don't know, maybe your database goes down, it's very, very expensive to plan ahead for that. That's the most I'll say. So we end up doing a lot of like rate limiting at like IP tables level and everything like this, just to prevent bigger customers costing us downtime or a lot of money. And then I talked about this a little bit earlier, but making the platform has been extremely challenging, like making it extensible, etc. There's also other issues, like larger customers, they want like LDAP auth or some other corporate thing, or worst case, it's like SAML or these things that I don't even understand because I don't use. So there's like features like this that they make sense to some organizations, but they're mostly larger organizations. And then the other thing was like the extensibility of these, like making all these plugins actually work it's been the biggest slowdown in the application. And this is where I talk about, like, I don't know if trying to fit everything for the hosted platform in the open source library, or in the open source platform, was the right idea. It's sort of worked itself out, but like the example here is we manage quotas on the website, and there's literally a hook in Sentry that just says, like, am I over a quota? Nobody uses that except Get Sentry. It doesn't even really make sense to most customers. Anyway, so we've tried to not one-off things like that, but in the end, it's just like, well, this is just too hard to make super abstract. And as I said, like, the goal was to make everything inextensible in Paint, and the plugin API is just filled with things that nobody ever uses, which maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, I don't know. So a lot of actually what I've taken away over the last year doing this was, pricing models. And this was interesting to me because, like, I always have an opinion on pricing in that I want to pay less. And so I tried to charge people less. But then I quickly learned that everybody's willing to pay more, and that was great. But, like, actually my partner and I, like, we hashed this out a few times, and we talked about, like, why don't we charge individual users more? And I always, like, stood by it, and I'm like, because it doesn't, like, we don't need to. Why should we charge them more? Like, I want everybody to be able to afford the platform, to be able to just use it if they want. And so we compromised by saying, well, companies are going to pay more. So, like, what this meant is, like, every plan is either targeted at individual or at the company level. And, the individual is very limited on what they can do. They probably don't have a lot of data. It's like personal projects, their blog, or a random Heroku app or something. So it doesn't even really cost us anything anyways. So then we look at, like, what does an organization need for features? And for us, it's like we basically say you can have no team members unless you're paying for one of the more expensive organizational plans. That's actually worked pretty well in the sense that we've actually multiplied the pricing by 4 for plans that are targeted at organizations since we launched. Originally, we had like a $7 plan, and this was February when we launched. That is now a $9 plan, slightly changed in what it allows. It's increased in actually everything except it no longer allows team members. And then I think we had like a $49 plan and a $99 plan. I don't quite remember anymore. Anyways, we now have like $7, $24, $79, and $200 basically. The $200 is the worst one to support. Again, like the bigger customers. But the $24 one, like, when we introduced that in January, like, I think it's what took Sentry from this side project where we can't really afford to spend the money to get real hardware to, like, now we can throw it at real hardware and just increase capacity and not really worry so much about expenses. So that was like something very valuable for me to learn. And again, I talked about the $200 plan. Like, we're going to actually try to get rid of this because it does cost so much. And it's basically like you get these bursts. You get, there's one company, for example, that literally uses like every language, and they send all this stuff, and they'll send like 500,000 events in a day, which is almost more than every single other customer in the system combined, and they pay marginally more. And it's not really worth it in the end. So again, I said we decided to focus on the small to medium-sized businesses, and I think it's been the right approach to keep like this as a nice side project and to actually like get a lot of traction. And if you're a bigger customer and you host it yourself and you use it, like, we're all happy. Like, in the end of the day, it's like more eyes on the product, like more people using it, growing the ecosystem, and it's win-win, right? And I mentioned this, but the big cost has been customer support. Honestly, most days, all I do on Sentry is answer emails, and there's getting to be more and more of them. And we kind of fix some of this by like improving documentation, or if there's a common problem come up, maybe we implement that as a feature, which is very rare. But it's definitely the side I'm seeing be the problem, and this is kind of an obvious and a known like factor. Like, if you cater to large organizations, you have a sales cost or something like this, but you have a few customers and they probably never complain. And if you cater to smaller businesses, you have a lot of customers. If you lose one, it doesn't really matter, but then you have a lot of people potentially having problems. Growth has kind of been an interesting thing for us. It's actually been really magical. We don't do anything, and people sign up. It's great. I mean, I don't know. I can't really say much about it. The only lesson I think I have is that we build a product that we love, and in the end, our users end up loving it. Like we continually improve it, and like every day I'm talking to the designer, and like we're going back and forth until we agree on stuff. And it's like it's always like I have this saying, and it's just like be better. And that's kind of just our goal, is to like always make the better product, like have the better platform. Because there's a dozen of these error logging applications at this point, and like my biased opinion is that they are all awful looking compared to Sentry, which has been a big deal for our customers. And so, you know, that belief kind of is like where we've gotten our organic growth, that we just make the best product and like everybody wants to use it. And the fact that it's open source definitely doesn't hurt. So our only takeaway is that we're going to focus on content marketing, which is like we actually hired a technical writer part-time, very cheap. But just the right blog posts. And we haven't really done this yet, like we're just starting on it, but I think this is going to be the direction to take something like this. But it just comes down to like iteration, like we're just figuring things out. And this is okay because we're not a real company. Like it really is just a side project. And it's interesting because I've actually sat down with investors and they're like expecting us to want money or something. And I'm like, well, it's cool. Like we have jobs and we work on this for fun and it's great and you know it makes money. That's cool. But like it's just a side project. And the reaction from them is always like what is going on? Like, and it's weird because like we actually have a business model in the San Francisco scene that's less common. People generally make a lot less money there, but they're good at pitching people on big ideas. And most importantly, like we just built this because we had problems we wanted to solve, and like spent 2 years on it to discuss. It actually solved problems for us, which was great. Solves a lot of other people's problems, from what I hear. Entire time we've been full-time employees at other companies. Right now is the only time I've actually been unemployed. So it's kind of nice. Like we've been able to work on this just in our spare time and actually grow it really well. But a lot of that did come down to me working on it a lot in the evening, a lot at night, or trying to find an excuse to work on it during the day, which I was able to do a lot more at Discuss. But it's been good for both the company and the individuals. You know, like I said, Discuss, much easier for them to recruit. It's great to be able to talk at conferences. Like it's almost to the point where like we're starting to sponsor events and things like that. So it's starting to get there, and that's been a really positive outcome. And the one thing that I want to leave with is this quote, and it's, if you do what you love, you'll never have to work a day in your life. And that's kind of how I feel about open source and like the companies I've worked at, is that they kind of allow me to do these things. And I think any good company would encourage open source and encourage side projects, especially when they benefit the company. And that's all I have. Hope I'm good on time. Yeah.
So, thank you, David. And there is a question already there.
Thanks, Zach, for great talk. And the first question is, if you have this side project, so it's now very well known, and as you said, you have the working business model. Did you think about moving it to be your major thing what you do? And the second thing, so if it's your side project, how do you deal with this customer service, this customer care? Because this is a very big problem if you have so many clients. And what about it?
So in terms of doing it full time, I did actually consider this recently. I just left my full-time job last week, and I really considered like, do I want to do this full time or join a larger company? My feeling right now is I don't want to do it full time. Like I think I would just get bored. Like, sure, there's lots of features I can add, but I don't really want to like push things, and I just don't know how I'd spend all the time, and I haven't needed to yet, so it's been really good. And regarding customer support and as the growing costs there, like I'm pretty good about answering emails during the day, but I am definitely starting to realize that those are increasing and the cost is increasing. At some point, it's probably going to come down to like we hire someone and like bring them on and pay them an actual salary. Hopefully that is still a ways out, and hopefully we can automate more things and improve things to just lower the customer support aspect of it. But yeah, that definitely seems to be like where a lot of the cost is going to come into play in the near future. So we'll see how that goes. Could be. You get customer support if you pay, I don't know. We'll figure it out. It won't be too hard. I believe in automation, so.
More questions there?
Thanks, David, for the insight and the validation of open source. I was wondering, I'm pretty sure you had this question several times. What happens if somebody decides to grab your code and host it for other people a bit and charge a bit less than you do?
I mean, you could try, but I'm saying you could try. I would definitely guarantee that we take all the customers, but I would just make it cheaper to win. Like, no, I mean, you could definitely like take the project and you could call it not Sentry and start a company or something like that. But it's like, I think the way I validate it is if you told like somebody, you're like, oh yeah, this is Sentry, and it maybe changed a little bit. It's like, well, why wouldn't I just use Sentry? Unless it's clearly better. And if it's clearly better, then that's an entirely different problem. But if it's just the same thing and maybe it's cheaper, and it offers exactly the same. So like an example of where I think it would be different is if like somebody did it in Asia or something like that. Like that's hard for us to capture. Like we've had thoughts on how we can do it, but it's not like really a target audience. So that would be an example of something that's a little different. But I mean, it's not something we really worry about because like we're growing well and we make enough money that it doesn't matter. Like at the end of the day, as long as the business sustains itself and doesn't cost us a ton of time to where it's a nightmare to run, then we're happy. But I don't have fears of that happening, I guess I'd say.
Oh, some more questions. Oh, just a moment.
I wonder how much of your time you spend on supporting your open source community.
It depends on which parts of that community because I have way too many projects that have way too many open issues. I will say like the nice thing about Sentry is almost everything except for Sentry itself is run by other users. Like the Java client, for example, there's a guy that just, I don't know why, but he just started building it all and like is doing a really good job, and like we do nothing with that. Like even like the Ruby client is almost maintained by other people now. The PHP client, like we built the basics and other people maintain it. So like that side of things, there's like very little, it's just like a little bit of oversight, and it's like very similar to answering emails at that point. The other side, I don't know. It's something I really enjoy, and you know, it comes down to the same thing. Like I'm willing to spend evenings and weekends on it when I'm not doing other things because I actually do love it, and I love the open source world and the community and like the products and stuff. So it's, for me, it's not too bad, and it hasn't been too much time where it's unbearable yet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, hi. How's the relationship with your customers? Do you find them, do they participate in the open source, or are they just like hands off?
It kind of varies. Like the larger customers who host it themselves are more likely to participate in open source. Like Causes is an organization that's actually contributed a bunch, and I think they're going to contribute a bunch more like on the Ruby side of things, which is awesome. There was another company, I can't remember offhand, that contributed a lot. And there's a few actually customers that pay us that actually contribute too. But it's very hit and miss. I think certain people, they don't expect that, like, they don't really understand like a paid platform versus like an open source. Like if you're using like MySQL or Postgres or something and you're just paying for support. You're assuming all the features exist, and if you have a problem that nobody cares, right? Like because it's a very different model, I guess I would say. For us, it's like you're paying for the product, kind of. Not really, you're paying for the hosted service of the product, but it feels like you're paying for the product. And when it feels like that, I think there's a stronger belief that you shouldn't have to like implement things yourself or whatever. But we're trying to push people to feel empowered to like, if there's a client or an extension that they want or that they want to add a feature to, that they could do it. We're not doing a great job at convincing people that, so I don't know. I would say it's like 10% of the people, if I had to pick a number, actually even realize that there's this open source thing that they could contribute back to. And then the other 90% are just like, well, if it doesn't work, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions or something. Or I'm going to hope that you implement these features for me and things like that. So it's very rare that companies are actually helping, that are actually using the hosted, or that are paying for it. I prefer, I'd rather everybody submit patches. But at the same time, like most patches, we don't land. And it's mostly because like people kind of abandon their patches, and it's like, well, this isn't quite good enough if you want to do this, or maybe we don't agree with this. But that said, there's a lot of like the clients, which are maintained by the various language clients, are actually maintained by some of our paying customers as well, which is cool. And it's hard to say. Like I'm okay with kind of that balance because I like owning the software and the product and like making it like my vision. Versus everybody's like visions trying to collide and trying to get everybody on the same page. Whereas the clients and things like that, it's a little bit less like hands-on for me. So, but yeah, I prefer everybody understand the open source world and understand how they can contribute if they want to. And ideally, if there's a bug, they open the ticket on the issue tracker instead of emailing the support team. But I don't know. It's a balance, and like so far, it hasn't been a problem on either side. I definitely would prefer more people understand the open source side of things. So, but I think that's education, and that's the ongoing challenge.
Hi, well, thank you for the talk. Very nice, very interesting. I have a few questions. One question is about the scalability side of things. So you said that it's all a side project for the people participating in the project. So what are you going to do about scaling once you reach a certain level that you cannot do anymore with just a side project approach?
I don't anticipate that ever being a problem. We have unbelievable amounts of capacity right now, and it's like very minimal hardware. Like we have like...
I'm talking more about support and
like the support scalability?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Honestly, if it comes down to it and we can't deal with it ourselves, like I said, we'll probably hire some people for whatever like they can help with. And I haven't quite figured it out. Like we wanted to find a way that people who like supported like languages, so like if you were the Java guy and you were like supporting that platform and you're just writing the client, and maybe you're writing it because you use it at work, maybe you're just writing it for fun or something, but like we wanted to find a way to like somehow, not so much employ those people, but like, you know, throw money at them or something. Like basically make them part of it. And we haven't really figured that out. Like there's a lot of complications doing those kinds of things. But it'll definitely be something in like a year that I think we have to explore, like what's the right way to move forward to like distribute these costs. Is it hire somebody to work on this or to like manage more things, or is it to like find a way to get more people involved and like open it up even more? And I don't have the answer yet, but we'll see what happens.
Okay, and the second question is a bit related to that, because you said the larger companies tend to create much more overhead for you. Do you have any strategy or plan on how to get rid of those customers?
Yes. Well, it may or may not work. We're just going to charge a lot more for those customers. And we're literally going to raise the price by like 4x on the large plan, and we're going to offer an SLA and then hope nobody pays for it. That is our answer right now. So. I would be okay with supporting it for 4x. That's like the balance. It's like.
Okay, one more question. Can you share with us some statistics? So how many in terms of percent of clients are outside the US? And the second question is, when you rise the prices for the companies per four times more, so how many clients left? Because it's interesting for me.
How many left? Was that the last part?
Yeah. How many clients left after this major price rising?
Okay, so the distribution of like customers, it's actually strange because we have the very hard problem of we operate a network service that needs to be low latency, and we try really hard to make the service very responsive and very fast, but that's not always the case, which is even worse if you're like in Europe and you're using it. That said, for whatever reason, a lot of people in Europe are actually using the hosted platform, and it can work in many situations because we use like, there's async models available that can just like send the messages in the background, so you don't really have to worry about the wait on the server. I don't know the actual distribution, but I will say there are definitely a lot of European companies that are using it, and like it's I don't know if it's necessarily like more than half, but it's a very large number of customers. And then regarding like retaining customers and based on price plans, we basically lock everybody in to their price forever. So like the guy who signed up the first day, and actually like every customer who signed up for the first month, I think, still pays. And they still have like the cheapest plan that they had at the time. That said, we now, when we change plans, like we raise prices, we don't like, we grandfather them into that price, but we grandfather them into that feature set as well. So it used to be like we'd raise the price and we'd like increase the amount of stuff they could send, and we just give the people who paid less that increase as well. We no longer do that. But I will say, like, I don't think we've really had customers leave for the price increase, or if they have, it's been like just a few that don't really like measure up. But we actually haven't had a lot of customers cancel to begin with, unless they were like using a platform that wasn't supported well enough for them, or I don't know, they stopped using the service, or I don't know. There were reasons that weren't so much on the side of like the pricing doesn't make sense, so we're gonna like move somewhere else. So that hasn't been an issue for us.
Oh, I think one or two more questions.
Thanks for interesting talk. The question is about actually the process of borning the project itself. You started at the Discuss, right? And this project was born at the Discuss. But now I see that you have your own Sentry username and the GitHub. So how this transition was done? I mean, what Discuss position is actually about the Sentry?
Discuss, actually all of our companies have been really supported. So like my co-founder and I were both at Discuss. We started it there. It was actually under my name the entire time, and that's actually because the license existed way before Discuss. If we built it entirely at Discuss, we probably would have left it there unless it made more sense for us to move it to our organization, which we would have just asked them permission or talked to them. That said, like Discuss has been super supporting. Like I have access to I have commit bid on basically any repository I need to within Discuss, even if it's private still at this point. And they're like, it's a very supportive company. They really were really backing this, and it helped that like when I joined, I was like, there were less than 10 employees, and we got to drive a lot of this culture. But that said, like I left the company, and the company I was at for the last 4 months, like they were very supportive. My co-founder left, and he's at GitHub now. They're very supportive of the project. So it's like a good company is going to be supportive of things like this, is the way I'd say it. And that's probably catered more towards startups and whatnot. But like, if a company can't see the value in open source, or people who have the like entrepreneurial spirit to do like a side project, then in my opinion, the company's making a grave mistake. So like in that case, like we had no issues doing it. Like it was just that one day we're like moving this to the Sentry org, and we just basically asked people if they were cool with this, and nobody had any issues.
Excuse me.
The question is actually, you spend your working time, right? Sometimes for the Sentry.
Right.
And the interesting is what is the position of company for that? You know,
Right.
you spend the company's time, but for your own open source project. I'm not talking about you. It should be closed source, but open source, not under the Discuss username. That's important. So
Right.
they support that also, and have no problem with that.
So in this case, it wasn't under the name because the license wasn't under them, but they supported it because we built it for us at Discuss. Like we actually built it internally, and it was open source the entire time. But it was open source the entire time because it was already open source. I'd say like there are lots of things inside of Discuss that we would have liked to make open source. We just didn't have the time, and it's very different if you start from the beginning in open source. Like it's less work than going back and changing it. So in that sense, like, while it wasn't technically a Discuss project because it already sort of existed before that, it was definitely something we built in Discuss for Discuss. And then when like we were doing the Sentry thing, they were supportive. Like we weren't doing it on company time, like actually building the .com stuff. When we were working on it, Discuss was benefiting from all the useful features. And honestly, like most of the features we added were still for Discuss, like for us at Discuss, not just for Discuss. But so I think in that sense, like it's officially not like owned by Discuss, like the copyrights or anything, but like we were big believers in open source. Like everything's Apache license that we released. Sentry's BSD, but that's because it was pre-existing. And they had no issues with any of it. Like they were really supportive when we're like, yeah, we're going to do this hosted thing on the side. And it's basically like any company, some are a little bit different, but a lot of companies will be okay with that as long as it doesn't interfere with your day-to-day duties. And that was really important that we made sure that if we were ever going to work on Sentry at that point forward, like during working hours, we'd have to justify it to ourselves that what we were doing was valuable to the company more so than it was like to our hosted service. But that was more us and less discuss like enforcing that.
Okay, so if you want just one quick question, the last one. Okay, here's the last question.
Yeah, you keep saying we, us, and my partner, so I was wondering where does he fit in? Is he like the sysadmin guru friend, or?
He's the designer. More or less 90% of Sentry I do, like I build the systems, I build the application. He does the design, he helps with like some of the marketing and stuff. He's formerly like the director of user experience at Discuss. And he's basically like, him and I, like we joined Discuss at the same time, and it kind of all started like, I think when we were doing like the Django Sentry and we were transitioning, he's like, let's just make this look a little bit better or something. And then when we were like doing the actual like full-on Sentry like self-contained platform, he's like, you know, I'd love to help like make this look even better than it did before. And like it's turned out like it's been a really good relationship. Like he's very good on the design side and I can handle the rest of it more or less. But yeah, it's just me and one other guy. And then a bunch of people who help with the open source side of things. But yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much. Okay, the coffee break will start in a few minutes. See you later.